Hello there. Yep, it's me, Cooper Howard, star of stage and screen. But I'm not here today to talk to you about my latest picture. No, today I'm here to show you a vast and wonderful place. Not made by God Almighty, but the working man. A veritable Camelot of the nuclear age. Now, how about we turn on some lights?
For those who don't know, and to really dumb it down, Fallout is essentially a story about who causes the apocalypse and why in this fictional universe, hence the famous tagline, "War never changes." Fallout has been a video game franchise since the 90s, I think. However, recently Amazon started producing a show based on the IP. This video in particular is mainly about the TV show, though I'll be borrowing some elements of the video game, of course. In Season 2, they answer that question, who causes the apocalypse and why, in sort of a roundabout way. The answer to who dropped the bombs isn't necessarily about one individual or organization, but rather it's about the butting heads of uncontrolled power in general. They make this very clear in how they mythologize the main players, aka the main factions in the universe. For one, there's the company Vault-Tec. Vault-Tec is the company that builds the vaults and the shelters that people live in to survive out the nuclear apocalypse. They're the corporate infrastructure people literally live in. The vaults appear to be these normal shelters to the average person, but they're actually just data farms conducting experiments on their own people. In real life, this is the same way to how Amazon appears to facilitate the infrastructure behind people's daily needs, but really operate as a data farm controlling people's wants. For example, in 2022, there was that expose about how Amazon was illegally in data sharing partnerships with over 2,000 law enforcement agencies across the world, providing illegal footage to police thousands of times over, or how the FTC fined Amazon over $25 million for the Alexa privacy violations and another $6 million for the Ring violations after finding out employees had been spying on their customers. Another mythical faction in the Fallout universe is Robco. Robco represents the sleek, modern, and monopolized tech company that we've all come to see in companies like Apple, for example. Today's iPhone serves the exact same purpose as the Pip-Boy in the Fallout universe. Users can't live without it. Another comparison is the Enclave. In the fictional Fallout universe, Enclave is this mysterious corporation that controls the military-industrial complex, I guess. And in real life, that reminds me a lot of Palantir and how they're responsible for all these military conquests on behalf of the USA. Mr. House, the individual who founded Robco in the Fallout universe, reminds me a lot of someone like Elon Musk, for example. In Fallout, Robco basically monopolizes and privatizes all of Las Vegas, and it's pretty similar to how Elon Musk is championing all these Mars colonies and moon colonies. Interesting that all the lore behind Fallout started way back in the 90s before all of these tech companies became what they are today. However, I find it particularly interesting that fast forward to today, we have a company like Amazon who produces this show. Yes, Amazon is producing a show that argues companies exactly like themselves are responsible for the end of the world. Not only that, but they are prescient of it. Co-runner of the Fallout show, Graham Wagner, directly addressed this contradiction in The Gamer interview in 2024 when he described the game's peak 90s adbusters anti-corporate energy. Showrunner Graham Wagner said, "The fact that it's being made on Amazon might put people at pause, but for us, that was a big part of the appeal. The absurdity of that we get to tell a story about a world that bet big on mega corporations and it collapsed and put it on Amazon is too delicious for words." My only question is, why would a company that resembles the real life version of the evil in the Fallout universe produce a show that calls out such hypocrisy? I believe that's because it's part of their business model. In 1964, Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan famously argued that the medium is the message, that the form of communication shapes society more profoundly than its content. On page 7 of his book, Understanding Media, The Extensions of Man, McLuhan writes, "In a culture like ours, long accustomed to splitting and dividing all things as a means of control, it is sometimes a bit of a shock to be reminded that, in an operational and practical fact, the medium is the message. This is merely to say that the personal and social consequences of any medium, that is, any extension of ourselves, results from the new scale that is introduced into our affairs by extension of ourselves, or by any new technology. He then goes on to define what he means by message. For the message of any medium or technology is the change of scale or pace or pattern that it introduces into human affairs. The railway did not introduce movement or transportation or wheels or road into human society, but it accelerated and enlarged the scale of previous human functions, creating totally new circuits, cities, and new kinds of work and leisure. Now let's apply this quote to Fallout. McLuhan would say, it doesn't matter what Fallout says about corporate power. What matters is that you watched it on an Amazon Prime Video subscription. You are already embedded into Amazon's infrastructure. The algorithm recommended it. The subscription paid for it. You aren't consuming a critique of Amazon from a position outside of Amazon. You're consuming it as inside Amazon, as a paying subscriber who has already accepted the terms of the relationship. On page 18 of Understanding Media, McLuhan goes on to say, our conventional response to all media, namely that it is how they are used that counts, is the numb stance of the technological idiot. For the content of a medium is like the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind. The effect of the medium is made strong and intense just because it is given another medium as content. Content level critique, what Fallout says about corporate power or corporations in general, for example, operates only at the levels of opinions and concepts. But the actual medium level effect, aka what the Amazon Prime subscription does to the viewer's daily watching habits, operates beneath the level of consciousness and affects us more intrinsically, according to McLuhan. McLuhan would watch Fallout and say that the message isn't that Vault-Tec is evil, the message is Prime Video. Content is irrelevant in McLuhan's eyes. Subscription is the ideology.
The reason that our educational system is in crisis is because we don't know how to stop this flow of data, this one-way flow of data onto the brain pans of the unfortunate and helpless students.
Step by step in the shadows glow. Hear the growl, feel the fear below.
Published in 1967, argued that authentic social life has been replaced by its representation, aka a spectacle of reality as opposed to reality itself. The spectacle isn't television specifically, or nowadays social media is a more apt comparison, but rather it's the entire system by which images replace lived experience as the primary currency of meaning. People would rather see images of their life being lived than life being lived itself. This is in line with McLuhan's concept of the medium. Debord would say that the spectacle is not the show Fallout itself. The spectacle is the social relation that Amazon Prime mediates, the relationship between the viewer and the corporation, between the attention and profit, between cultural consumption and political passivity, all structured through mediated images. A key mechanism of the spectacle is recuperation. Karen Krasinski, in her book Anthropology and Aesthetics, defines recuperation as the process by which those who control the spectacular culture, embodied most obviously in the mass media, co-opt all revolutionary ideas by publicizing a neutralized version of them, literally turning oppositional tactics into ideology. In other words, recuperation is the process by which revolutionary or critical ideas get absorbed into the dominant culture and rendered harmless. For example, punk becomes a fashion aesthetic, or anti-capitalist art becomes gallery inventory, Andy Warhol, or Che Guevara becomes a t-shirt, and a show that argues corporations will end the world becomes prestige entertainment on a corporate streaming platform. In the 59th passage, Debord says, the smug acceptance of what exists can also merge with purely spectacular rebellion. This reflects the simple fact that the dissatisfaction itself becomes a commodity as soon as economic abundance could extend production to the processing of such raw materials. Think about that quote from the Fallout perspective. Amazon's economic abundance allows it to process anti-corporate dissatisfaction as raw material into content or engagement metrics, into a subscriber retention basis. Debord would say that the radicalism of Fallout's premise is precisely what makes it so effective as a recuperation device. You watch it, you feel like you're culturally on the pulse seeing this anti-corporate narrative, you feel like you're getting something. And then when the show's over, you open your phone and scroll to the next thing. The critique produces no real antagonism. It produces engagement metrics. Amazon isn't afraid of the content because Amazon is the content.
Pop that cat, hear the sound, ching-a-ling, those
Herbert Marcuse is the thinker who came up with the concept repressive desublimation in his book, The One-Dimensional Man. Marcuse essentially argued that one of capitalism's most sophisticated moves is neutralizing dissent not by suppressing it, but by satisfying it, cheaply and aesthetically. In other words, capitalism gives people the feeling of rebellion without the actual reality of it.
If an empire calls us terrorists, then we're doing something right.
Capitalism lets people watch an anti-establishment show and feel the catharsis and have that pressure release valve go off, but nothing actually changes.
Whoa, whoa. Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
In chapter 3 of his book, One-Dimensional Man, he argues this by saying, today's novel feature is the flattening out of the antagonism between culture and social reality through the obliteration of the oppositional, alien, and transcendental elements in the higher culture by virtue of which it constituted another dimension of reality. This liquidation of two-dimensional culture takes place not through the denial and rejection of the cultural values, but through the wholesale incorporation into their established order, through the reproduction and display on a massive scale. To highlight what Marcuse is talking about, let's look at Fallout again. Fallout is repressive desublimation in its purest form. The majority of people won't feel any political sentiment while watching Fallout. Let's say like 95% of viewers don't have any critical theory relation to the show. However, 5% of people will watch Fallout and see some sort of political anti-something statement or other, some sort of anti-corporate rhetoric, because that's the underlying theme of the show. But the emotions of those 5% of people who actually had a visceral reaction to the show have nowhere to go except back into the subscription they're paying for. Amazon has turned their critique of Amazon into a leisure activity you pay for monthly. Marcuse goes on to say that this isn't some grand conspiracy or actual business model of these corporations, and it's more like a natural democratic process. On page 64, he says, the fact that the transcendenting truths of the fine arts, the aesthetics of life and thought, were accessible only to the few wealthy and educated was the fault of a repressive society. But this fault is not corrected by paperbacks, general education, long-playing records, and the ballation of formal dress in the theater and concert hall. Domination has its own aesthetics, and democratic domination has its democratic aesthetic. It is good that almost everyone can now have fine arts at their fingertips by just turning a knob on his TV, say, or by stepping into a drugstore. In this diffusion, however, they become cogs in a culture machine which remakes their content. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Amazon explicitly goes into their board meetings and talks about repressive desublimation. Neither would Marcuse or McLuhan or Debord. However, it's just how the system works. The spectacle doesn't require a conspiracy, it just requires the incentives to align, and in the capitalist neoliberal world, they do perfectly. The last thinker I want to bring up is Mark Fisher in his book Capitalist Realism. In Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, he opens with the now famous quote, "It is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism." You know, since we're talking about Fallout with the end of the world and the apocalypses, I feel like it's a pretty apt way to conclude this video, given the whole world domination, corporate thematic elements of Fallout.
The future, my friend, is products. You're a product, I'm a product. The end of the world is a product. And for those of us who can successfully embrace that, I'd say the future is golden. To the future.
To the future.
just to be clear, I love Fallout, both the show and the video game. I just think it's really important that people actually watch it with proper critical lens. If you like the video like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. I am Justin, and this is BM Love.
And the new. The medium does things to people, and they're always completely unaware of this. They don't really notice the new medium that is wrapping them up. They think of the old medium because the old medium is always the content of the new medium, as movies tend to be the content of TV, and as books used to be the content, novels used to be the content of movies. And so every time a new medium arrives, the old medium is the content, and it is highly observable, highly noticeable. But the real roughing up and massaging is done by the new medium, and it is ignored.
In the wreckage of